Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh to our panels, Mr. SAMSUDEEN and Mrs. NURULAINI. I am NURIN SYAZANA binti Muhammad AZUDIN and with my partner, Syuhaira binti Muhammad PESAL. On this day, we will present our research topic, which is predictors that influence the intention of disaster preparedness in UiTM Merbok Kedah that is supervised by our beloved supervisor, which is Mr. Muhammad NAZIR bin RABUN. First and foremost, we will get into the background of the studies. Based on the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change 2007, it says that massive weather and climatic events are being caused globally by human activities that have direct impacts on the climates, oceans, and land. Disasters have become increasingly pervasive in the last 20 years, and the consequences of that have become more intense. Universities are an important academic institution, and the practice and efficiency of disaster management in universities has a substantial impact on emergency preparedness on campus and in society as a whole. Disaster preparedness is a set of action taken to ensure that the supplies necessary for an effective operation either are available before the disaster occurs or that they can be easily accessed in the event that they are required afterwards. The number of people killed or injured after the disaster can be minimized if preparation is carried before the disaster occurs. Despite this, watchmen and soldiers said that most people ignore disaster preparedness and do not actually realize on how critical it is until a disaster strikes. Next, we move on to the problem statement in this study. In order to react quickly to the disaster in Malaysia, the Ministry of Health has taken a number of actions, and the Malaysian government is considering a number of plans and strategies to lessen the effect of the disaster like flash floods or tsunami. The government has regulated the disaster risk management under Directive number 20 in auspices of the National Disaster Management Agency, which is NAMA. This agency is established by the government to manage the disaster in the country as well as to take over the role of National Security Council (NSC) in handling disaster. Chan 2022 mentioned that there are low attention towards the issues from the public, government and many other institutions to disaster that Malaysia suffers, such as earthquake, tsunami and flash floods. The previous Malaysian Prime Minister has openly acknowledged the government's shortcoming in the flood management and emergency response during the greatest flash floods that occurred in 2021. Here are the series of questions that were initiated to create a better understanding pertaining the main predictors that affect the intention of disaster preparedness among administrative staff in UiTM Merbok Kedah. The first one is, what is the level of disaster preparedness intention among the administrative staff in UiTM Merbok Kedah? The second one is, what is the relationship between attitude, subjective norm, perceived behavior control and risk perception with the disaster preparedness intention among the administrative staff in UiTM Merbok Kedah? Lastly, the question is, what is the main predictor that affect the disaster preparedness intention among administrative staff in UiTM Kedah? Now we are moving on to the objective that will be a guideline for the research in order to address the research questions. And here are the research objectives that have been identified. The first one is to examine the level of disaster preparedness intention among the administrative staff in UiTM Merbok Kedah. And the second one is to analyze the relationship between attitude, subjective norm, perceived behavior control, and risk perception with disaster preparedness intention among administrative staff in UiTM Kedah. And the third one is to determine the main predictor that affect the disaster preparedness intention among administrative staff in UiTM Kedah. From this proposed study, model of the research comprises of attitude, subjective norm, perceived behavior control, and risk perception will be the key factors to examine the university's disaster preparedness intention. The university disaster preparedness intention will be the dependent variable, and the attitude, subjective norm, perceived behavior control, and risk perception are the independent variable for this study.
Hi, Assalamualaikum. I am the second presenter, which is Syuhaira, and I will continue with the next part of this presentation, which is research method. As this study uses quantitative method study, cross-sectional study and hypothesis testing is used as the research design. We measure the outcome and exposures in the study participants, and we decide on a possible conclusion from the hypothesis from statistical inference. Then, the unit of analysis is the administration staff in UiTM Kedah, which we receive 50 respondents from them. Our sampling technique is purposive and convenient sampling, as the respondents meet our criteria as administration staff, and those who are available will be our respondent. Next, the data measurement is nominal and ordinal for socio-demographic section because we use labeled variables, and the variables are in specific order, and Likert scale for other section, which the points are ranging from 1 strongly disagree to 5 strongly agree. Other than that, we use printed questionnaires as data collection, as the survey is printed form to be distributed. The questionnaires are divided into 6 sections, which is the section A, demographic segmentation, section B, disaster preparedness intention, section C, attitude, section D, subjective norm, section E, perceived behavior control, and the last section, which is section F, risk perception. Lastly, our data analysis is using Pearson correlation to analyze correlation between attitude, subjective norm, perceived behavior control, risk perception with disaster preparedness intention. Finally, multiple regression analysis is used to examine the key factor that affect level of disaster preparedness intention. To the next part, I will be explaining about our main findings, which is demographic profile. There are 9 demographic profiles in this study. For the gender, we can see that the female respondents are higher than male respondents, which resulted in 58% and 42% respectively. For marital status, most of the respondents are married with a frequency of 40 respondents, followed by single, which is 7 respondents, and 3 respondents for divorced. Among all, 50% of the respondents are aged from 41 to 50 years old, followed by 36% of respondents from 31 to 40 years old, and 14% for 20 to 30 years old, and none of them are 51 years and above. For level of education, the highest level of education among respondents are degree, 56% or 28 respondents, and the least is PhD holder, which is only 2% or 1 respondent. Next, most of the respondents are from bursary, which 12 respondents filled the form, followed by 7 respondents from administrative and 6 from library. Other than that, most of the respondents have worked with UiTM Kedah for 6 to 10 years, which resulted in 40% or 20 respondents, and the least of them has worked for 15 years and above, which only 14% or 7 respondents. Among all, the respondents has attended disaster training attendance for once and 2 times, which 30% each items, and 9 of them never attend such training. 28 from the respondents or 56% has experienced handling disaster, while 21 from them or 42% never experienced it. Lastly, most of the respondents are from support group, which scored 44%, followed by management, and professional group, which is 28%. Top management group 18%, and other service scheme, which is 10%. We move on to the goodness of measurement, reliability analysis, and normality analysis. To assess reliability, Cronbach alpha value is essential to examine, as if the value is less than 0.6 seen as poor, between 0.7 and 0.8 is fair, and the value that is greater than 0.8 or close to 1 is seen as good and reliable. Hence, based on the data here, it shows that all variables are reliable, as the disaster preparedness intention value is 0.908, followed by all independent variables, attitude value 0.793, subjective norm value 0.748, perceived behavior control value 0.899, and risk perception value 0.719. Next, for normality analysis, skewness and kurtosis value system used to evaluate normality. All variables are evaluated as normally distributed, as the skewness and kurtosis values are in range of -2 and 2. Next, we move to the findings on each research objective. Our first research objective is to identify the level of disaster preparedness intention among administration staff in UiTM Kedah. We have conducted descriptive analysis to examine mean and standard deviation of each objective. According to the table here, the mean is 4.21 and standard deviation is 1.401. Hence, it shows that the majority of UiTM Kedah staff has high level of disaster preparedness intention, as the mean is higher than 2.5. Next, the second research objective is to analyze the relationship between attitude, subjective norm, perceived behavior control, risk perception with disaster preparedness intention among administrative staff in UiTM Kedah. We have used Pearson correlation to evaluate the level of relationship between two variables. As said by Cohen, 1988, the range of R value from 0.10 to 0.29 categorized as low, from 0.30 to 0.49 is moderate, and 0.50 to 1.0 is categorized as high. The first one is correlation between attitude and disaster preparedness intention among administrative staff in UiTM Kedah. The R value is 0.498 and the P value is 0.0, which is lower than 0.05. It indicates a high positive significant relationship between attitude and disaster preparedness intention among administration staff in UiTM Kedah. Hence, H2 is supported. The second correlation is correlation between subjective norm and disaster preparedness intention among administration staff in UiTM Kedah. Based on the result, the R value is 0.63 and the P value is 0. It shows that there is a high positive significant correlation between subjective norm and disaster preparedness intention among administration staff in UiTM Kedah. Subsequently, H3 is supported. The third correlation is between perceived behavior control and disaster preparedness intention among administration staff in UiTM Kedah. According to the table, the R value is 0.729 and the P value is 0. It shows a high positive significant relationship between perceived behavior control and disaster preparedness intention among administration staff in UiTM Kedah. Therefore, H4 is supported. The last correlation is between risk perception and disaster preparedness intention among administration staff in UiTM Kedah. Based on the result, the R value is 0.397 and the P value is 0. It indicates a high positive significant relationship between risk perception and disaster preparedness intention among administration staff in UiTM Kedah. Therefore, H5 is supported. Alright, for the third objective, which is to determine the main predictor, which is among attitude, subjective norm, perceived behavior control, and risk perception that affect the disaster preparedness intention among administration staff in UiTM Kedah. We use multiple linear regression to model the linear correlation between independent and dependent variables. According to the result in the table here, it presents the independent variable is 5.86% of the variance in disaster preparedness intention, which is highly significant. The F value is 15.942 and it is considered as significant as the P value shown is 0, which P value is lower than 0.05. From the result, the value of standard beta and P value of attitude is 0.126 and 0.345 respectively, while the value of standard beta and P value of subjective norm is 0.331 and 0.04 respectively. The value of standard beta and P value of perceived behavior control is 0.536 and 0 respectively, and finally the value of standard beta and P value of risk perception is negative 0.19 and 0.197 respectively. After all, only two predictors were found to be significant, which is subjective norms and perceived behavior control. Therefore, we can conclude that perceived behavior control is the most significant predictor that affect the disaster preparedness intention among administration staff in UiTM Kedah, as its standard beta value is greater than other variables, which is 0.536. Okay, we move on to the recommendation. The first recommendation is responsibility to the community. Even though the society know about this, university carries a huge responsibility to the community during normal days and during disaster. University can include assisting civil authorities in staffing relief centers, helping in rescue operation for victims, and provide assistance in search and rescue. Next, reorganize internal measures. University can arrange the collaborative between students and staff to spread awareness of disaster preparedness and management through seminars, training, and mentor-mentee program. Other than that, a written disaster preparedness policy and handbook is important to outline the detailed emergency information and training materials. Last recommendation is educating young generation. This is important to educate them to prepare a community for impending disasters. Early education can reduce their insecurity and strengthen their adaptability. This will also improve their ability to manage disaster and prepare for potential disaster. We have arrived in the last part of this presentation, which is limitation. The first limitation is the research method, which we use quantitative method. It is ineffective as researcher could not obtain various opinions and the respondent's answer is only depend on a set of questionnaires. Hence, in future research, the method in conducting this study need to mix with qualitative and quantitative method to gain data. Second limitation is the respondents are only selected from administration staff, not represent the whole UiTM staff. Other campus of UiTM like UiTM Machang also vulnerable to natural disaster such as flash flood and landslide. There is no standardized guideline and plan to prepare for disaster applied to all campuses. Hence, to get a better understanding regarding this research paper, it should include all UiTM campuses to measure their readiness. To conclude, this study has carried out to 50 respondents among administration staff in UiTM Kedah to examine the intention of disaster preparedness intention. Attitude, subjective norm, perceived behavior control, and risk perception are identified as predictors that influence disaster preparedness intention. Based on the findings, it shows that perceived behavior control is the most influential predictor that affect disaster preparedness intention among administration staff in UiTM Kedah. Therefore, it shows that most of the respondent has preventative action intention on disaster.